So, I know I've already made a welcome to Keishaz video, but there are two things wrong with it. For one, those drawings suck. Two, I totally skipped over lots of the other major cultures, and I feel like I should redo the video and give those cultures and civilizations their due time. Now, if you're new to this channel, or don't know what Keishaz is, I'll give you a brief introduction before I play tour guide for you. Keishaz is a world I started on August 27th, 2019, when I wrote a short story called The King's Death Wish. Since then, I've written over 50 more, a total of 73,000 words, give or take. I plan on someday compiling these short stories, which are about kings, wars, religious and cultural aspects of the world, etc., into a book that I'll publish for all you to read. That's why I started this channel anyway. What does Keishaz mean? Is it some word from one of the languages spoken on it? Indeed it is. Is it some lofty concept that reflects the deeper meaning of the world? No, not at all. Keishaz is from the early Nucrian word for dirt, with a plural suffix stuck on the end. That's it. Before we get started, I'd also like to mention that Keishaz has a limited time span. It lasts from about 1000 GN to a little after 3000 LM, so we've got about 4000 years covered here, but I tend to focus mainly on the period in which Mira exists, from 1 to 1920 LM. Alright, I'm ready to play tour guide now. Let's start at the beginning, in their world. Aronach, the first god, creates a few angel things and has a couple kids who marry each other and have their own kids. Moving past that. Aronach, for reasons, gets paranoid and locks up everyone but himself and his wife in a prison, so Yamashet, his son, breaks out and kills both his parents. Now the blood god is in charge, and he makes the world and the people. Yamashet and his sister/wife have 10 kids, 2 of whom rebel because why not? Akkad and his sister/wife, Izunu, get sent to that same prison after they get backhanded out of heaven, or Omet, for being naughty. Akkad is somewhat miffed and decides to have kids whose sole purpose is to kill off a third of humanity, or something like that. The culling happens and introduces death to the humans, who are now very afraid and start gathering in cities. These cities become civilizations of their own, and one day a young boy named Negeb becomes king out of nowhere, and he decides that all the cities along this river called the River Nuke need to be under his control so he can make them more religious. This actually works, and he names his new realm the Kingdom of Mira, the very first multi-city government in the world. Mira takes off as a cultural powerhouse, becoming one of the most respected establishments in the world. Other nations try to follow suit, but they just can't keep up. Mira invents writing, paper, and the very concept of civilization beyond city walls. Yeah, they've got their bad eggs, like Urin the Terrible and Olno the Bloody, but they also have some pretty genuinely good kings. Shamur the Vindicator comes to mind, who I did my last video on. This is approximately where Mira is in this world, on the southern continent known as Dekabi. To the northwest of Dekabi, we have Nemvu, and in the very north, we have Rayami. On Dekabi, there are 4 major ethnic groups: the Sharabites, which include the Mirans as well as their eternal rivals, the Hasidians and the Zeltsans, the Pomegons, the Thasians, and the Koshites. We'll start with the Sharabites, where our main focus lies. The Sharabites are a people with a very tan complexion, almost ruddy. They cannot grow facial hair and thus never appear in my videos with facial hair, with the exception of Shamur IV, whose mother was non-Miran. The Sharabites, as I mentioned before, are divided into 3 main groups: the Nucrians, the Hasidians, and the Zeltsans. The Nucrians, pretty much synonymous with Mirans, are the primary focus of Keishaz, known for being the founders of civilization, right along this river which gives them their name, the River Nuke. They speak early Nucrian for a while, which eventually branches off into the other Nukric languages, very much inspired by the ancient Egyptians and the Aztecs. The Nucrians are the ethnic group inhabiting Mira, a very civilized nation living in the fertile grasslands around the River Nuke. They kind of get a bad rep for being somewhat violent, which isn't entirely untrue. Several of their kings have gone crazy, and lots of their myths involve fairly violent acts. Heck, their chief deity is the blood god. They believe blood is the vessel of the tangible soul, the part bound to the material world. The intangible soul is contained within one's name, and there's a whole torture method that involves denaming someone. They're also very particular about bleeding. Say you get a cut on your leg, and some blood flows out. Most people put pressure on the wound, but a Miran will make his or her best attempt to collect all the blood so they can later pour it into a special minty drink called a kutam drink, named after the leaves it's made from, and drink it so they can replenish their souls. That's the kind of particular I'm talking about. The Mirans are also the origin of lots of technological innovations, such as certain battle techniques and, of course, writing. Philosophical ideas have come out of this country, and extremely popular plays have been written here too. Overall, it's a decent place to live, depending on which king is in power. The Hessadians are another subgroup of the Sharabite race, and not much really needs to be said of them. They speak a descendant of early Nucrian and are more or less the Mirren's mortal enemies. Same with the Zeltsans, though they descend from a group of religious heretics in Coluz, the westernmost city on the Nuke. They were banished into the desert, or Dey Shamaz, after losing a civil war, and that's where they roam today, made up of tribes comparable to the Bedouins of pre-Islamic Arabia. Moving on to the Mongolian and Assyrian-inspired Pomegons now, they are centered around Artagon. The Mirrens move their capital based on their king's liking, but the Pomegons don't even dream of moving their attention off of the sacred city of Artagon, where their chief deity, the god of war Guruk himself, came down to give a message to his people. According to the Pomegons, Guruk instructed them to make war against their neighbors in order to worship him. Guruk gave the first Pomegon emperor the Black Axe, with which he would slay his enemies and earn his way into Pomegon heaven. Moving on briefly to the Thaians, I won't say too much about them, since they're not actually my creation. The Thaians are the doing of one of my friends in real life. What I will say is a general overview of them. They live along the Durban and Turgis rivers, primarily as a nomadic people. Their one large city is named Thurtala, at the confluence of the two rivers. They're a different species of human, having gray skin and more hair, as well as an overall more Neanderthal look, except instead of being shorter, they're taller than your average human. The Mirrens, towards the end of the second millennium LM, conquer the Thaians. Basically, Thumuz I travels to Thurtala and declares it to be his own. That's all he really does. Oh yeah, and he also throws a huge party where he gets blackout drunk when he gets back to Mirror to celebrate his accomplishment. So there's that. Let's move way over to the western end of Dekabi, where the Koshites live. The Koshites are divided into three subcategories: the Solari, the Araveni, and the Merkushi. The Merkushi are our primary interest. Living in 5 cities in the plain of Merkush, the Phoenician-inspired Merkushi are known for their sea trade empire, as well as being absolutely loaded. There's a reason Epilir is called the City of Color, aside from all the major buildings being covered in bright tiles. It's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. Epilir is the most dominant of the 5, and that's because, though they used to be separate and independent, they fell into war with each other after they got scared of the Mirrens. Long story short, one of them suggests unification so they can stand together against the uppity Mirrens, but they can't figure out which one of them would lead the others, so naturally they start killing each other. Epilir and Ku ally and defeat the other cities, beginning the diarchy period until King Ugon IV of Epilir did some shady stuff and made the king of Ku magically disappear, so he became the sole king of all 5 cities. While Epilir could claim to be experts in the production and trading of many things, they were known for one thing in particular, the Mirkush horse. I won't tell you exactly what happens, since I plan on making a video about it someday, but the Mirkush horse is a very closely guarded product, and the Epilish only sell male horses, at a very steep price, so no one can breed 2 Mirkush horses. What's so good about these horses? They make lots of milk and are more or less self-sufficient, in the event that the Epilish would take them to war. They also metabolize pretty slowly, so they don't require much food. Anyway, this closely guarded product gets leaked, so you'll find out what happens in that video. Moving on up to Nemvu, we arrive at the Mirren's cousins, the Relians. North and South Relia are technically separate nations, but they are in what they call the eternal friendship. They never come into conflict with each other, mostly because they need to stand by each other against the belligerent, stuck-up Kurites to the north. We'll get to them soon. The Relians aren't super fleshed out, but they do have a cool origin story, where the eternal friendship actually has its roots, and they can also claim Nyakul the Crafty as one of their own. The Kurites are really only one nation, the Makuturuk Empire. Before that, it was a collection of warring city-states. They speak Wudar, a language which takes heavy influence from Arabic, with triconsonantal roots and everything. And they are to the Relians and Dagites as Persia was to ancient Greece, the antagonists. Here's a brief history lesson, because the Makuturuk Empire really doesn't last that long. Hurid III is the king of a fairly sizable city called Hurukab. He has a son named Fawal, whose name is significant for reasons I will get into when I make the Wudar language showcase video. Fawal goes on a conquering spree, as you do, and establishes the Makuturuk Empire, whose name translates to Between the Waters. His son Rivid II doesn't do much, but Rivid's son Fawal II, later known as Fawal the Underwhelming, nearly ruins the empire. He wants to prove himself a capable leader, so he plans an attack on North Relia. The North Relians figure out his plan, though, and they launch a preemptive attack. One of Fawal's advisors says, "Sire, the Relians from the south have attacked." Fawal interprets this as the South Relians, not the North Relians, so he attacks South Relia. This ticks off the South Relians, who immediately declare war, and Fawal is notified of his mistake only a few months later. The Southrelians won't reason with him, and the Northrelians won't stop attacking, so he has to just put up with the war. We get sort of an 1812 situation after a while. Fawwal manages to regain most territorial losses, and then the war stalemates. The three heads of state meet in Yomernach, the capital of Northrelia, and declare peace. Makutaruk has other crises it runs into from inept kings, namely when Yakul absolutely bamboozles Rumajosh II, but that's all I'll say for now. There's already a video where I read that story anyway, so go check it out after this one. Moving on north to the Dagites, they're sort of fleshed out. They're actually the oldest component of Keishaz, because they predate Keishaz by almost a year. If I remember right, I wrote a poem called The Wind of Fire, in which three city-states are at war, and the king of one of them has a secret weapon that he wants to use against them. Well, he's not exactly a scientist, and he really screws it up, so he ends up vaporizing his own city and killing everyone in it. That poem was inserted into a world with a separate project in which I created a 49 generation long genealogy, like in the Bible, about a family line and its ups and downs throughout history from a nation called Disha. Well, Disha and friends were inserted into yet another world building project called Pala, with a religion consisting of a god named Fluvamari and a set of angel like beings, some of whom rebel and split off, etc. There will be a video on them someday, don't worry. Finally, I abandoned Pala and later started Keishaz. And there were some good ideas in Pala, so I took that culture and assigned it to the Dagites in Keishaz. Voila, we have a world inside a world inside a world inside a world. The Dagites, like I said, aren't the most fleshed out in the world, but they do have a decent religious system and a knack for getting smacked around. There are also a few stories about such kings as Ponek and Ditori, who I'll make a video on someday when I talk about the fall of Palatia. Now, we've covered the southern continents, but what about the northern one? Is there anything or anyone up there? There is indeed. Reami, the northern continent, was actually discovered and named by the Thaiasians, who got there before the Mirans. They named it Reami, or our north, because the mountains they found reminded them of their own home. This was borrowed into the Nucrean language as Ryami. The Mirans sent Vendin, an explorer, all the way over to this new land. On his way, he wrote a book called Great Northern Land, where he details his experiences with all the coastal tribes he encounters: the Nilango, a Filipino-inspired people; the Mot, a very secretive, xenophobic people; the Hudzai, known for their hanging coffins; the Igri, who are actually not my creation, but are one of the forerunners of organized government and civilization in Riami; and other places like the Sasha, the Nula, and the Mvuri tribes, the last of which is extremely odd because of their thumb cult. You heard me, thumb cult. There's also a Korean-inspired Empire of the Three Suns over on this side of the continent. Well, there are actually two of them, and they both call themselves the Empire of the Three Suns. I might do a video on them someday. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the northern tribes, because I plan on making videos on them at some point, but this is just a general overview anyway. Just know that Reami is a big place, much larger than Dekabi, so there is lots of potential there. Now that I've told you about all the cultures and civilizations of Keishaz, where does Keishaz stand in relation to the rest of its universe? Well, first off, Keishaz is a flat slab of land. It's not a sphere. Now that that's out of the way, I should also mention that the Miran gods are real in their own universe. Yamashet, Luvi, Akot, all of them, they're real. Omet, the Miran version of heaven, is real, and it floats way above Keishaz. Ubejesh is also real, at the bottom of an egg-shaped universe named Oran. Aule hovers just below Omet, where Aule judges mortal souls and either grants them passage up to Omet, or quite literally backhands them down to Ubejesh. Fun fact, on the way down, they appear in the night sky from Keishaz as shooting stars. Extra evil people appear as comets, or those fireball meteors called bolides. Is Keishaz part of a solar system? Well, considering Yamashet created Keishaz from his dead father's corpse, the sun is actually just a horse pulling Luvi across the sky, and the only stars are just a feature of the skin of Dazgari the night god. No, Keishaz is not part of a larger solar system. But don't let that stop you from imagining it as part of one. One of the members of my Discord server is planning on writing a sci-fi Keishaz spin-off, and that may or may not require extra planets. Canonically, Keishaz and the other realms I mentioned earlier are the only things present in the universe, but again, let your imagination go wild. I can't really think of anything else, so I guess I'll be wrapping up this video. Thank you to everyone who made it this far, and I hope you enjoyed this longer video, and I'll see you all in the next one.